Okay, you join me again for another breakdown video. This time it's the Raider custom build. I kind of got a bit bored with actually bothering to finish it, so I never painted the side panel. It was just an idea which seemed a good idea at the time when I started doing it. You can see it's got the external H100 there with a sort of fairly steady be quiet fan, but it's keeping it nice and cool. I haven't seen temps above about 55 degrees. Right, with the case off, you can see it's got the old GTX1070 that's been in the Optiplex, because I'm sort of comparing this to the Optiplex at the moment. I've tried to build it for about the same price. Because I already had the cooler and things, I'm sort of allowing some money for the cost of those. And I had to buy the new coolant to put in there, but they're within, I think I said the Optiplex was £325 if you don't count the LEDs. So this build as it stands, I reckon if you tried to build it yourself it'd be about the same, but I'll run through it all. Obviously it's got the Republic of Gamers LEDs on there. They were a relatively new thing, LEDs on boards, when I got it, and it's got a reset button and thing there for when you're doing things, when you're doing your overclocking, which can come in handy when you're trying to set it up. As I've said in previous videos with the H100, all the lights and the pump settings have all bust years ago on there, but I mean it seems to work alright. Anyway, I'll unplug it and we'll run through all the different bits and roughly what they cost. Okay, we're starting with the side case cover. The case was free. It was rescued from a skip. This fan is a Redwing fan, just an 80mm PWM. I like them because they give reasonable airflow and they're quiet. Front of the case, DVD drive, which I actually stole out of the Optiplex. That actually is wired up and works okay. This obviously doesn't work, but I just left it in there for the time being. I haven't got any USB or microphone headphone jacks at the front, which is a bit of a pain in the arse. So when I do upgrades to this, I'll probably put a little panel or something in with them on. On the top, as I said, we've got the H100 Cooler. This was a bit of an old bike tire I cut up just to make sure I don't end up cutting any of the pipes on the bits of metal. I cut it out there. I always put my coolers out on the top if I have them, because literally you just get the ambient air just blowing straight through. You got no heat coming from the other parts. Easily the best way to cool your PC if you're going to do liquid cooling. I know it don't look very good, but I've done it with the internal radiators before, and a lot of the time they're no better than having an air cooler. On the back, well, we'll leave that for a second. So on the back is Republic of Gamers Maximus Hero motherboard. So you've got a serial connector there for the old style keyboards and mice, which is handy because a lot of the time when you're overclocking, the USB controller goes a bit skew-whiff, so it'd be good to have the old style keyboard in there if you want to get your clocks up reliably. You've got different reset buttons and things on here. 4 USB 2 ports, 4 USB 3. So compared to the Optiplex for the same money, it's a bit superior there for the number of ports it has. Usually Ethernet, loads of jacks for your microphones and speakers. Obviously all the standard stuff there that you get with your GTX1070 as before. Coming into the case, try and not damage anything. So from the top I've got the Gigabyte P650B power supply. That was £45 brand new, where I think I paid 50 for the Corsair, so £45–50, usual sort of price you got to pay for a decent power supply on a build of this sort of price. On the motherboard you'll see there that that's some fairly high-end RAM. I've got 8 GB of Corsair Vengeance 2133 and 8 gigabytes of Trident X from G-Skill. I wouldn't advise putting them in a super budget build, because you ain't going to get, each pair of them sticks is going to be at least 30 quid. What I've done is I've allowed £2 a stick, which is how much they are from CEX for standard, just 1600 megahertz, or 1600 really, because 800 megahertz RAM. And what I've done is I've set the timings on it to the same as what the Optiplex had, and I've set the speed the same, so then that's a fair comparison on any of my Optiplex versus this build. Plus, if you was building it, unless you could get a really good deal on them sticks, you're not going to get that much better performance for day-to-day use having them. Not really. You're better off just having the 1600 sort of standard RAM, really. If you're doing overclocking benchmarks and trying to get on high scores on the table, then yeah, that sort of RAM's a must. Like I say, still got the same old GTX1070 that I paid about £115–120 for November last year. They're still that sort of price. You'll see on this board the SATA ports, there's some more under there. They stack them on the end, so they're in a double row. So if you do put a big card or anything on there, this board obviously you can have 2 cards, you're not actually going to foul the SATA ports, which was one of the problems I had with the Optiplex when I put the Intel Arc in. It ended up fouling one of the SATA ports, so I literally only had 2 left. So you've got plenty of them. I think there's 8 in total. Hard drive, I got that for nothing. Someone had it laying around, 3 terabytes. That works fine, so I just threw that in there for a bit of extra storage. Not that I've really got anything on it. As I said there with the side case fan, when you're doing a lot of overclocking, these VRMs here, they do tend to get really hot. In all honesty, this board, especially with an i5, that ain't going to hurt it. But I just like to have decent cooling on the VRMs. If you're doing proper overclocking benches, you always have fans and things attached to them just to try and cool them as much as possible. That's the reason I haven't got an exhaust fan, because if I had an exhaust fan, you'll get the airflow coming in the side, but most of it will end up blowing straight out of the exhaust, and it won't actually get to where I want it to go. And some of the air is actually going to end up going through the power supply as well. So in a way, having that fan blowing in there will actually help keep the power supply a little bit cooler as well, if nothing else. Whereas with an exhaust fan, don't always quite work that well. Possibly it might be worth fitting a front fan here somewhere, because the airflow in the front of this case isn't quite as good as it is on the Optiplex one, despite me drilling a few extra holes on there. So we've got the DVD, so the hard drive, or the solid state drive, if I can get it out. It's just another Adata. This time it's a 240 gigabyte. Don't know if you can see that. That was £15. So really the solid state drive and the power supply cost the same as in the Optiplex, because I think I paid 50 for the power supply and that, and I paid a tenner for the drive in it, but that was only 120 gigs. So it's the 4670K on the final settings that I've got. It's running 1.42 volts on the core, which is pretty safe. I think if you went much higher than that, you'll start having Windows errors and things like that coming up. 4.5 gigahertz on all cores, and it's got a 4 gigahertz on the cache memory, which the chip has standard 3.8. So that's basically the overclocking. I've had to obviously do stuff with the load line calibration, and there's tons of electrical settings on an Asus motherboard where you can get yourself stability, but I've managed to do it so that when the computer is ticking over on the desktop, it will drop the voltage down to about 0.8 volts, and it will drop the clock speed down to about 800 megahertz. So you still get your power efficiency, but it's still working and being stable at a decent clock speed. So yeah, I mean, I could push it higher if I weren't bothered about having the energy efficiency, and I weren't bothered about maybe risking the chip in the long run a bit more. I could most likely get another 100 megahertz out of it, but I'm trying to build things that are going to be good for the long haul. I don't know. I don't like damaging hardware just because. I would rather build something that I can run for a long time and not ever have to touch it again. I just think, yeah, there is a time and a place for running fast benchmarks and saying you're getting the best this and that. But I think ultimately, if you're a really, really skillful overclocker, you should be able to get like a maximum performance without damaging any of the hardware in the long run or having to suffer crashes. It's literally, I want my PCs to be so that if you press the button and you didn't know that it was overclocked or anything, you'd have no difference. All you would perhaps notice is that it's a bit more responsive and a bit faster than normal. Otherwise, as a normal user, you'd be none the wiser. That's what my aim is. Yeah, I don't think there's really a lot else to say about it. Like I say, I think the build price, depending on how cheaply you could get a second-hand H100 and you've got to allow for changing the fluid, would come out at round about 325. It just depends what you can pick up. I mean, sometimes you can get sticks of RAM for nothing. There's people that have given me 4 gigabyte sort of 1600 sticks and that in the past for free, or I've nicked them out of old systems that are going in the skip. So yeah, this is basically the same cost, I would say, as the Optiplex to build. Just depends what's around. In terms of upgrades, I'm going to be putting the 4770K in there, so you can see if you can just stretch your budget that little bit higher and, you know, have a little bit higher spec PC on something like this motherboard, how much more performance you're going to get. At the moment, overall, for the actual gaming experience, this runs the i7 Optiplex 4770K, which obviously can't overclock. That runs it real close. In benchmarks, this is better on some, that's better on some. In games, if you're not doing video capture, then this is better if you unlock the V-Sync and let it sort of flow, I would say. But the i7's always that bit smoother, and if you start doing game capture, as I'm doing on my tests, then I would say, all straight streaming, you want the i7 every time. A quick i7 overall in 2023, I would say, is your better machine. But if you haven't got the money to spend loads, then this is a good starting point. And also as well, with the i5 that came with the Optiplex initially, if I tried to put 16 gigabytes of RAM in it, that was losing some of its bandwidth because it weren't powerful enough. This has actually got better bandwidth on my benchmarks than the i7's got, but that could be partly because I've increased the speed of the cache memory by a couple of 100 megahertz as well. So in the main, this is definitely up to the job. See you well, and then as soon as you save up like £55, that's how much a 4770K is, you could drop that in there and away you go. 4790s, they're still running about 90 quid. I can't find them any cheaper, but I've got somebody that might be supplying me some hardware now, who's also a bit into computers and develops games, so I should fairly soon have a 4790 coming, which I can try in both machines and just see if it's worth spending that extra bit of money over the cost of the 4770K for what you get. I know most people on forums are going to say it's not worth it because it's only 5% faster, all this and that, but ultimately, if you're running a new graphics card and you're playing AAA titles, if you can get that extra 5 or 10%, that's the difference between having a good game and a game that's not really that nice to play. So if you've only got to pay an extra £35–40 to have that much better experience, I personally think it's worth doing rather than having to go out and buy a whole brand new system. So there you go. I hope you like the look of the build. Like I say, I know I called it a Raider build, but it was just, I had this case laying about and I thought rather than just leave it all bland and standard, I'd bash it about a bit with a hammer and paint it and mess around and try and make it look a little bit rusty. But yeah, I got fed up with it. I've not actually finished it. Might do later. Got some LEDs I can put in there. So yeah, hope you like the video. There'll be more sort of breakdown ones. I'm also looking at revisiting the £250 budget Optiplex build, because I think if I was to swap some parts around, I can keep within the budget and actually have a better performing machine than that was initially